We're so afraid of those 2 times that someone just gave us nothing to work with. And if someone gives you nothing to work with, that just means they're not a part of your story. Like in a video game setting, you can walk up to the NPCs, everyone with their little question mark. You can hear their dialogue. You can find out, oh, this one has a quest for me, and this one just wants to talk about how lazy their dog is, right? And so some NPCs move your story forward, and some NPCs join the party and become part of the group. And if you don't talk to them, you don't find out.
Hey everyone, today I bring you a special guest, Dr. Daniel Kaufmann. He recently published a book about gamer's journey. So Dr. Daniel Kaufmann is a YouTube partner at Dr. Gameology, where he teaches about the many positive elements of video games that help us overcome professional and personal journeys in real life. He's an associate professor who's helped develop programs for gaming and geek therapy training in clinical settings, and his publications cover video games, personality theory, online education, and counselor development. Dr. Kaufmann recently published the book, The Gamer's Journey, to help you turn the themes in many video games into life lessons that can unlock your own potential. Daniel, thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So, just to get started, what's The Gamer's Journey?
The Gamer's Journey is a book that answers the question of what if we explained the hero's journey and the stages that we see in all our favorite fiction stories, but we told that story using only video games, their characters, and their situations.
So how does understanding that impact our own personal development, like our own personal growth? How can we use that? Because I'm familiar with the hero's journey, but I'm guessing that there's a twist when it comes to gaming as well. And I know that we can use that to improve our own lives. How does that work?
Absolutely. So the twist when you are a gamer is that you are the person controlling the character that just achieved victory in their story and saved the world. When you're reading a book or watching a movie, or it could be a comic book, an anime, or a manga, you're actually a bystander that's mentally entering into that world and watching it happen, but you don't get to own the victory that just occurred. And you don't necessarily learn the same life lessons from it because it wasn't your victory. It was Batman's or Superman's or Captain America's or, any slew of the millions and millions of protagonists across all of fiction. But in video games, you with the controller in hand or the mouse and keyboard guided that character to the victory that they were hoping for at the beginning of the game. And because of that, you mentally are interacting with their goals and objectives in a way that is very different than when you're a passive observer.
Yeah. So it's when you're like watching a movie or reading a manga or whatever it is, you're identifying with the hero, but you don't have an active part in the actual outcome. Whereas when you're the gamer, the outcome happens because of what you're doing, right? So it would be like more of a direct connection. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. All the time, as my age gets up there, I will fall asleep in movie theaters, and guess what? The movie ends whether I was conscious or not. So I'll wake up somewhere close to the end, and my brain will have to fill in the gaps and try to figure out, that character was not in this situation at all when I dozed off. But in video games, if I fall asleep with the controller in my hand, I wake up 90 minutes later and the character is standing exactly where I left them, wondering, why don't I do anything in life? And how relatable is that when we talk about getting deadlocked with our daily routine, when you have things like anxiety disorders or ADHD, or things that just get into your mind and make time feel a little different and make the pressure feel like it's paralyzing instead of motivating. And I think in our mental health journeys, we can totally relate to the idea that you have to play your goals. And if you don't play them, you can't really expect to achieve them. And also, you don't have to succeed on the first try. I think a lot of adults in my upbringing kind of made it seem that way. That's the story that I was sold as a child. And it continued deep into adulthood, deep into my academic journey. This idea that you have to succeed every single time you do something. And that is just not true.
Yeah.
And the better teacher for that life lesson for me was actually Demon Souls, and then Dark Souls and Elden Ring, and even games that I died a lot when maybe I wasn't supposed to, like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Just early on in the game, not understanding all the different things you have to do to survive. And you're playing it more like a video game until you realize, oh, I have to be smart about every choice that I make, or I'm going to die here and I'm not going to be successful here. And so even though those are all games, there are things in adulthood and in my work life where if I had understood it's okay to not be perfect here, and that perfect is just a construct as well that the people judging your work created so that you'd be motivated to aim for it, but it's not real. The best you can do in this moment is real, but perfect is not real. Perfect just means you did everything that was on the list and nobody feels like critiquing you.
Yeah.
Okay. And in video games, though, perfection is real because it doesn't care about your feelings and it judges you very harshly according to its rules. According to its rules, every single thing that it does to you. And I think that that's such a neat comparison when you look at how life works, IRL, in real life, and then you look at how the virtual world works, where things are measured perfectly by performance. But in life, we have feelings and we have goals and we have things that we think that we're owed, and we get entitlement and we get all kinds of other things that get in the way and warp our story and take our mindsets off of that. Let's be the hero of our own story and make it more about metrics. And I think that the irony here is that for me, video games didn't teach me how metrics work. They taught me much more about what a better version of being human would work.
You were talking before about how growing up, you were given this idea that you had to get it right in the first try. I'm rereading the book Mindset by Carol Dweck because I want to write a blog post about it. And that's basically it, right? Like that's the fixed mindset of you have to get it right in the first time versus the growth mindset of like every time I do something, I learn something more and then I get better, right? And I've always wondered why, because like for me, I saw a connection straight up. It's like I play video games, I get XP, I get better, I can do the same in life. And I made the connection right away. Why do you think that some people like say, okay, in video games, I can like spend time, get better, just spend hours, days, months playing to get better, get XP, if that's the case. But in life, have this fixed mindset of I have to get it perfect. What's needed to make the connection that if it works in video games, it also works in real life?
That is such a big question for us to try to answer in one podcast episode. I think that when you have things that come down to tests and grades and benchmarks, the pressure to do it perfectly and succeed on the first try creates a ripple effect that affects how a lot of different individuals in that situation are going to spend their time. So the person doing the test or being judged or evaluated has to perform and demonstrate their talent. And then the person evaluating them has to submit a score and provide feedback and back up the score that they gave with an explanation and say, this was very good or this was not very good, and here is why. So right there, you have two people whose time is being invested in this evaluation. But sometimes that evaluation gets pushed into other people, like organizations or departments or managers or supervisors. And so now you're multiplying the number of people whose time is invested just over one person performing a skill. And I think that the reason you can't just do something like it's a video game where here's a challenge, you can fail it as many times as you want this afternoon, but the goal is for you to complete it successfully at least one time. Okay, that's how video games work. And when you lose and that boss battle defeats you and it has those nice red words on the screen, you died. And then you hit to continue and try again. So you respawn and you try again. 5 seconds later, you died. 10 seconds later, you died. 35 seconds later, you died. 1 minute later, you died. Sometimes it goes back down to 5 seconds. Sometimes it goes up to 2 minutes later. Every time you get that timer to take longer of how long you made it, you're getting better. Your skills are going up. But humans do not evaluate other humans that way. It's like we're all so pressed for time that we only have time to watch you do this one time, and it better be your best shot. Yeah. And that doesn't make it better. That is just the difference where video games do it better than reality. I wish my students could take their midterm and their final exam as many times as they want on that day. And then the highest score is the one they get to take. But the system that my school uses doesn't test people that way. You get one shot and that number locks and goes straight into the grade book. And then I see the score, I see the timestamp, I see what questions you got wrong, and I just validate that it calculated it correctly. And then I move on. So I don't even get to be like a video game. It's just, that's how the world works.
They're not allowed to retake the course if they fail it?
Well, if they fail the course, they can pay for the course and take it again.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is, if that test was like a video game, they could just say, I want to take it again.
Yeah.
Right? But they can't.
Yeah.
Because the test is not programmed that way.
Yeah.
Because that test is like a school course and not like a video game. So the valuable things from video games, like the idea of growth mindset, which my book talks about and has a couple really good graphics to also go along with the description in the words. Video games are all about growth mindset. You gain EXP from everything you do that's a small success to a large success. And when you fill certain thresholds of EXP, you level up. And we do this in life. We don't get the big explosive lights around us and a big number above our head that goes up. Well, I guess that's what birthdays are, I suppose.
Sometimes.
But, you know, the EXP that we gain, you do over time start noticing that you do things better if you are practicing them and gaining that EXP. And that is why role-playing games work the way they do. It's not that life is like a role-playing game. It's that role-playing games were designed to mimic life, right? That's the core structure behind gaining EXP and leveling up, is it explains how someone who does something over and over will get stronger at it over time. And that also explains the concept of max level. I mean, how many of us listening to this podcast or doing whatever it is that we do in our day-to-day lives are really at max level. And how much of the things we're upset about in life are because we think about ourselves like we're max level, but we're not yet. And if we keep investing that time in ourselves to keep growing, eventually, maybe we will turn around one day and be like, I've peaked. I'm max level. There's nothing else for me to do unless I multi-class and start getting EXP in other areas.
I think you're talking about EXP. I think one of the things that's maybe missing in what will be real life is some sort of visual counter of we're getting better, right? And in the book Atomic Habits, James Clear mentions, like, he's like, just get a jar and put something inside every time you do a habit, so that it's a visual representation of how much you've progressed, right? And to me, that's literally an XP bar. That's it.
Mm-hmm. That would do it.
Yeah.
That's gamification right there. You're taking something that is not as visual and not as much of a game mechanic, but you're adding the game mechanic into your life and you're making it visual. You're making it so that your awareness is tracking it and you're making it into a goal.
Yeah. And then you can look at that and say, oh, this is how much I've put into it. Because it's really hard to look back. I mean, what I use is I'll say, okay, give yourself XP for something that makes you anxious, like maybe 1 XP, 3, 5. And when you get to 30, level up. And to me, the key is when you level up, you have to look back and say, okay, when I started or in the previous levels, what was a thing that I could not do that I can do now, right? Because we're always in the present and we're always looking at what we cannot do. Versus if we say, okay, I got this much experience doing this thing. Now that I leveled up, I have to remember what it was like before, because that's going to tell me that I have improved. And speaking of, I wanted to ask you about Elden Ring, because you have a great video about how Elden Ring teach you grit. And I always talk about how, so most of the people that I talk to, it's about like dating and being afraid of talking to someone and being afraid of getting rejected or asking someone out or asking for a number and then them saying no, or maybe even worse, making fun of you. And often I talk to people and they're like, I always get rejected. I'm like, okay, how many times is always? 2. I'm like, well, that's not that many. For me, right. Like if you're a gamer, you're used to losing, right? Especially with Elden Ring, which is your example. And
yeah.
And I'm like, just think of it as you tried something. Don't think of the other person as the enemy, but like the actual activity, right? I want to talk to someone. I want to invite someone on a date, ask for a number. That's the, let's say, the boss or the enemy. I got a no, or they weren't into it, whatever it is. You lost. Fine. You're used to losing already. You're a gamer. Just use that same mindset and say, okay, I'll try again with someone else, but I'll try again.
Yeah. The other thing in that scenario is you didn't really lose anything because you didn't have their number in the first place. It's not like you had it.
Yeah.
And then because they said no, you lost it. You didn't have a date scheduled with them. You know, you were going after something that's a possibility, and all you're doing is revealing whether it is a possibility or not.
Yeah.
Right. But on some intrapsychic level, where all the things outside of your control are happening, if you decide not to have that courage to go and ask, then you just don't know.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you had something. That doesn't mean you missed something. It just means you never found out. And I think that desire to discover things, like in a video game setting, you can walk up to the NPCs, everyone with their little question mark. You can hear their dialogue. You can find out, oh, this one has a quest for me, and this one just wants to talk about how lazy their dog is, right? And so some NPCs move your story forward, and some NPCs join the party and become part of the group. And if you don't talk to them, you don't find out. And I think that that can be really encouraging as well, because we're so afraid of those 2 times that someone just gave us nothing to work with. And if someone gives you nothing to work with, that just means they're not a part of your story. And I really like that you highlighted that whole focusing on what we have instead of on what we don't have. And you were talking about our personal abilities, but I think that that also relates to our relationships and the things that connect us with other people. Is sometimes you have the party that you need already. You just aren't thinking about those people in your life that way.
Yeah.
And I think also with romantic connections, we want to have those in our lives so bad. And it can hurt very much when we have this idea in our head of what could be, and then it does not end up being true. But growth mindset would still encourage you to keep putting yourself out there, because the right person who's going to say yes and be intrigued by what it would be like to get to know you better and spend a huge amount of their time with you, you just haven't found them yet.
I love how you were talking about NPCs, because that's 100% the example that I use. Like, I've made reels about it. I write about it. It's you. Usually with most games, you don't have anything on top of some of the NPCs. You have to talk to all of them, and you go and you talk to all of them. Some don't even have a line. Some have maybe one line to give like some lore or context. Some will give you quests. Some will be enemies. Some will join your party. Some can become romantic, like NPCs. But you have no idea unless you actually go and talk to everybody. Right. And the other example that I use is, no matter how much you level up your charisma, you can always roll a 1. So it doesn't really matter. Like, sometimes you may think that you have like the best phrase, the best opener, the best questions, but for whatever reason, that person can just not be into it that day. And that's fine. And it's not your fault necessarily. Like, this way of looking at things, at least for me, like, it's helped me personally, right? It takes a lot of the pressure off because most of the time you're like, I want that number. I want to go out with that person. I want them to become my partner, whatever it is. And you start, like, you mentioned it, like, you start making yourself like this image in your head of what they're like, what your life would be like with them. But if you just think of it as, I'm just going to talk to everybody, see what type of NPC they are, then you can start doing it more often and eventually just meet someone, right? That's literally the growth mindset.
Yeah, you almost have to go after it, even though you know that this is the end of me imagining all of that.
Yeah.
You know, that I either find out that some of it can become true, or I find out that none of it's going to become true. But you're putting the end to that fantasy of imagining it, and you're actually forcing yourself to discover, can this be real? And that's empowering. It's also terrifying, but you have to do it. Otherwise, you're just living with a lot of things that are fantasy and fiction.
Even more than video games.
Video games are just metaphors for how we get ourselves to face these things. They're also training simulations. You know, for one of the things that I think is really fun as a mental health professional is any video game that has dialogue trees. And then you see how the characters react to the things that you choose to say to them, because that's what my job is at the end of the day. And so games like Persona, or games like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, or Baldur's Gate, I think that those are really fun conversation simulations, but they can also teach teenagers how to notice the difference between, you could say all these things in this list to your parent when they're getting on your case about doing something, but which one's going to be the best for the situation?
Yeah.
And so it helps them to upgrade their persuasion or charisma stats, when actually without video games, their charisma or persuasion would just stay exactly where it is, and they wouldn't understand how to tell the difference between these different dialogue options and being able to predict how you're going to sound to different people you're talking with, and how you can learn how to approach people just by playing a video game and taking the time to realize, oh, this is actually how conversations work.
Yeah. Yeah, I talk to a lot of people who say that one of their biggest issues is conversation skills, like either how to start conversations or how to keep them going. And I often find that they tend to ask closed-ended questions, right? Like things that have just one answer. And also they might, like someone might say like, oh, what are some of your hobbies? And they'll start like just like talking endlessly about a video game or whatever it is without checking in whether the person is interested or not. And one of the analogies that I use, like you were saying with RPGs, with dialogues, is most people, if you ask an open-ended question, will give you a few different options to go off of, right? It's that like conversation tree or dialogue tree that you were talking about. And you can pick any of those and explore them. And if you get bored of one or you want to switch things, you can go back to the other one that you remembered. And so like, okay, this person talked about whatever it is, I don't know, tennis, anime, running, and manga. It's like, okay, I'm going to ask about manga and start talking about that. Like I met someone, I think last weekend, and I mentioned that I was doing this content and this podcast and stuff. He's like, oh, what do you watch, anime, whatever? And he reads a lot of manga, and we just started talking about that, right? But I just mentioned it, and he chose to go on that topic. And so I think like RPGs really, if you pay attention, you can say, okay, the options that I'm getting are because of these things that the NPC mentioned. And you can use that exact same idea for real life.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, another thing that video games teach you that kind of rebounds off of that idea is that your choices matter.
Yeah.
And in video games, sometimes your choices don't actually matter, but it creates the illusion that your choices matter. But that's kind of the same for life too. Sometimes your choice didn't actually matter, but I think ultimately we want to believe that our choices matter.
Yeah.
Right. And it is, regardless of how much they matter in the grand scheme of things, the best option is for you often to do your best in every situation where you can. Okay. And that takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of determination to keep showing up like that. But if you keep showing up like this is a game that you want to play, even when you don't want to play it right now, but if you keep showing up in life like this is a game you want to play, eventually you will show up better than the people who are not connecting with their life that way. And that will put you in amazing situations. And if it hasn't happened yet, you just have to keep going. You know, there are so many, it's hard to explain this because I know if I was an 18-year-old listening to myself, if I was an 18-year-old, I would not believe what this old guy is talking about. You know, same goes for if I was 24 or 30. But the things I'm doing right now are the kinds of things that I always hoped I would be doing. And those things did not become options for the first 17 or 18 years of this academic journey. That's a long time to dedicate yourself just to leveling up with an idea of what you would like to be doing. And writing things and doing extra things and being available to always pick up the extra roles was something that I decided to do as a working professional because I always saw the value in picking up extra character classes and learning how to heal even though I'm a DPS, and learning how to tank even though I'm a healer on this group, and learning all the different positions of the boss fights, of how to survive them in case someone in my group is struggling and I can explain it to them, even though their role is not my role. And that really does relate to what I do as a professor and as a supervisor and as a program creator and a content creator too, is just trying to explain things to people like, what is the gamer's journey and how can we find a way for these ideas to connect with your life? And I just came to the realization that all the people I want to help in the world, I can't meet all of them anymore. The solution for me to feel good about how I'm spending my days stopped being about one-on-one things with people. And I started thinking, how do I get my ideas into a place where it could help thousands of people every day? And so that's why I started working on explaining it as a book, because I always felt that someone should explain the hero's journey using only video games. That thought, I first had it back in like 2005. And then I wrote a chapter for the psychology of Pokemon. And then that book, Hero's Journey, but with video games, still didn't exist. And so then I was like, well, I wrote one chapter and it was great. It was well received. The feedback was positive. And I just started to think, maybe I'm the person that has to write this. So then I wrote a chapter for the psychology of Elden Ring. And then immediately after I finished that chapter, I started working on my outline for the chapters of the gamer's journey.
Yeah, I think it's not a straight line. And maybe it's not the game that you want to play at that moment, but I think it's the achievement that you want. It's the sword that you want. It's the mount that you want. It's something that you want to get, and you have to go through the grinding to get it.
Yeah. Well, that's the pairing of extrinsic motivation and how it relates to intrinsic motivation. So if I want that mount, that's an external motivator. But the part of that motivation that's internal is what I think that mount says about me as a player and my ability to broadcast that when people see me flying through the air on this particular mount. They're going to know I achieved that specific thing, or they're going to know that out of all the mounts I could be using, this is the one that explains the vibe that I want to drop on everyone right now. And so that's internal. Okay. But it's us expressing our internal world through the video game. So extrinsic and intrinsic motivations are separate things, but they directly connect with each other in a two-way relationship. And so if you're only doing things because of external motivators, you may not feel very fulfilled when you achieve things through that motivation. But if you have an internal connection to an external reward, that probably becomes one of the most powerful motivators you could have in life. And then the most powerful is probably internal without the need of an external measurement, right? But video game companies create achievement lists because they were realizing that gamers are not understanding all the cool little things they could do if they played these games for 100 more hours. So they had to create lists to control our gameplay behavior and teach us that there are so many other things you can be motivated to achieve if you just look at the list. But as a result, I think that kills creativity when you're just trying to complete things because of a list. So I'm not a big fan of external motivation, or extrinsic motivation, I should say. I think that if that's the only reason you do things, you're eventually going to reach a point where your achievements feel hollow.
Do you think there's a way to translate that to real life without it being hollow? Like me saying, my goal is this. I'm going to give myself all these achievements on the way to reach my main goal.
Well, yeah, if you want to reward yourself along the way and continue to gamify your situation yourself manually, then you can definitely manage your motivation for a longer period of time than someone who's not doing those things, because it's very easy when there's no goal and there's no reinforcement or feedback for giving up to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. In order for something to be a game, it has to have a goal. It has to have rules. It has to have feedback on how well or not well you're doing. And it has to be voluntary. And if you have those four things, then you actually can engage with an activity and make it fun. If you're missing one of those things, the fun goes away very quickly.
Yeah. So again, what were the four? You said
you have to have a goal, you have to have rules, you have to have feedback, and you have to have voluntary participation.
Right. So for example, like in my case, and I have done this, right? Like I'll be in a situation where I want to talk to someone and I'm too shy to do it. And I'll be like, okay, would I do it for 1 XP? No. Would I do it for 3 XP? No. I'll do it for 5. And then I'll go and do it, right? And the XP comes from the doing it, regardless of how they respond. Like much of the time, they either don't speak English or they just don't want to talk, which is totally fine. But as soon as I finish it, I give myself 5 XP. And I got rejected, if you want to see it that way. But I'm super happy because I got 5 XP. So that would be extrinsic motivation. I have the goal. It's voluntary. I got the feedback because I got the how they responded, and I got that I actually did it, which was the main goal. And the rule was I go and I say whatever it is, regardless of the outcome. So I guess it ticks all the boxes. Cool.
Yeah.
So where can they find the book? Where can they find you?
You can buy the book on Amazon or from Barnes & Noble or Books A Million. Most online retailers for books have it listed now. So it's very easy to find. And if you want to buy it directly from the publisher, you can go to the Geek Therapeutics website and see all of their books in the current series. I also wrote chapters in the Psychology of the Witcher and Psychology of the Last of Us, which those books are also coming out next week. So it's a huge week for me as an author. But The Gamer's Journey is 100% me. Every chapter was written by me. So that's a whole different thing that I'm very much looking forward to. You can find me online at Dr. Gameology, DrGameology, and that's my handle on Twitch and YouTube and LinkedIn and Twitter/X, Threads, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere, TikTok too. So same handle everywhere. Oh, I guess there's Blue Sky now too. There's so many of them. I'm not going to pretend that I do all of them well, but I would love to meet you if you're listening, and I'd love to continue the conversation wherever it is you want to connect with me.
Awesome. And speaking of continuing the conversation, to everyone watching and listening, if you have any questions for Dr. Kaufmann, please leave a comment, send me an email at dm@roadtoday.com or social media @roadtodate. And hopefully we can bring him back and ask some more questions. Daniel, thank you so much for coming. This was great.
Absolutely. Once we get the book and you can read it all the way through, I'd love to come back and do a follow-up. That sounds like it would be really great fun.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Thank you.